You are standing in the aisle of a big hardware store. It is late spring. You are looking at a plastic jug of bright blue powder. It costs almost $25. You pick it up. It feels heavy in your hand, but it is mostly just chemical salt and blue dye. You know your tomatoes need something. You know your bell peppers are starting to look a little pale around the edges, and the tag on the jug promises a heavy harvest. But every time you pour those chemicals into the earth, your soil gets a little harder, it gets a little more tired, and your wallet gets a little lighter. Now I want you to sit with this. The weeds you spent all Saturday morning pulling out of your yard, the ones you tossed into a wheelbarrow to drag to the burn pile, contain the exact same minerals as that blue powder. You can make a lifetime supply of liquid fertilizer for $3 using what you already have sitting in the dirt, and it works. My name is Levi Stoltzfus. I am Amish, and I farm in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. Today, we are going to make weed tea. I will tell you straight away, this method takes about 2 weeks to brew. It does not look pretty. It smells like a working farm. But honest is better than impressive, and your plants will thank you for it. The English call them nuisance weeds. They go to the store and buy poison to kill them. But why do the big fertilizer companies actually need you to throw your dandelions away? We will look at that later. Right now, we have to look at what that $25 blue powder is really doing to your garden. A lot of folks use those 2-0 mixes. You mix a scoop with a gallon of water, you pour it on the roots, and 3 days later your tomato plant shoots up dark green. It looks like a miracle, but it is a trap. Those commercial synthetic fertilizers are built on salts. I was reading the soil science data from the university extension, and they measure this. They call it a salt index. Lakes, a lot of those popular water-soluble powders have a salt index over 50. When you pour that on your garden, the plant takes up the fast nitrogen, but the heavy salt stays behind in the dirt. Year after year, that salt builds up. It pulls the moisture right out of the soil. It dehydrates the earthworms and the microscopic life, the natural web that actually builds good topsoil. You can feel the change in your hands. Good soil holds together like a damp sponge. Dead soil crumbles to dust, and it turns a pale, lifeless gray. When the soil dies, your plants get weak. They stop fighting off bugs. And then you have to go back to the store and buy more of that blue powder just to force them to stay alive for one more season. I have seen it happen. An older fellow down the road. Good man. Always kept a neat yard, used that chemical feed every single week. By August, his garden beds were baked as hard as a brick. The rain would just pool on top and run off into the grass, and that runoff is the other half of the trap. Those synthetic powders dissolve so fast in water that the plant roots simply cannot catch it all. The EPA puts out water quality reports on this. They track where all that nitrogen goes. They estimate that 30 to 50% of the synthetic nitrogen folks apply to their gardens and lawns washes right past the plant roots. It leaches down into the groundwater. It washes out into the creeks and streams. Think about the math on that. You are paying $25 a jug, and half of it is washing away before your tomatoes can even touch it. To stop buying the poison, we have to look at how the earth feeds itself naturally. A forest does not need a plastic jug of chemicals to grow a 100-foot oak tree. It uses what is already there. It brings up what is deep in the ground. We are going to do the exact same thing here at this workbench. We just need to understand what we are looking at when we pull a weed. We are going to use the deep miners. I have a pile of them right here. Let me show you the root on this dandelion. Look at the taproot on this thing. It is thick, pale yellow, and it goes straight down into the dirt like a spike. A tomato root spreads out near the surface. It is a shallow feeder. It eats whatever is in the top 6 inches of your garden bed. Once those top 6 inches are empty, the tomato starves. But a dandelion does not care about the topsoil. That taproot pushes down a foot, sometimes 2 feet into the hard clay where the vegetable roots cannot reach. Down in that subsoil, there is a vault of minerals. There is potassium. There is calcium. There is iron. The dandelion pulls those minerals up through the dark and stores them right here in the green leaves. Before we go any further, you need to hear this clearly. Make absolutely sure the weeds you pull have never been sprayed with chemical weed killer. Not by you, not by the county road crew, and not by your neighbor. If you use sprayed weeds, you will end up brewing a concentrated poison that will kill your own garden in a single afternoon. I only pull from the fence lines and the back pasture where nothing but the rain touches them. When you have clean weeds, you have pure fertilizer. The agricultural plant analysis folks actually measured this. If you take a dandelion leaf and dry it out, it holds up to 4.2% potassium and 3% nitrogen by dry weight. That is not just green matter. That is heavy, usable food. It is what makes a pepper plant set strong fruit. Potassium is what gives the plant the energy to push out a heavy blossom. Without it, the blossoms dry up and drop off in the July heat. I have a pile of comfrey here on the bench, too. It has big, broad leaves that feel a little like rough sandpaper. You can use stinging nettle if you have it growing near a creek bed. These plants are what we call dynamic accumulators. They are miners. They do the heavy lifting in the dirt, so we do not have to. Stay with me. Comfrey is special because of how fast it gives up what it mined. If you look at the composting guidelines, they track how fast organic matter rots by looking at a carbon to nitrogen ratio. Wood chips have a lot of carbon. They take years to break down. Comfrey leaves sit right around an ideal 10-to-1, maybe 14-to-1 ratio. I do not worry too much about the numbers on the paper. I know what it means when I hold it in my hand. It means when you crush this leaf and get it wet, it breaks down fast. It releases all the trapped nitrogen almost immediately. You can feel the thick stems snap when you bend them. They are full of water and green sap. I took a wheelbarrow out behind the horse barn this morning. It took me maybe 20 minutes to gather this pile on the workbench. I pull them by the base to get as much of that taproot as I can. You can smell the sharp, bitter scent of the sap as soon as you break the stem. That bitterness is the minerals. Every farm has these weeds. You probably have them growing up through the cracks in your driveway right now. Most folks see them as an enemy. They fight a war against them all summer long. But when you understand what that taproot is doing, the weed stops being an enemy. It becomes a free farmhand. It brings the good soil up to the surface where you can finally use it. Pulling the weeds is only half the job. We have to unlock what is inside them. A lot of people see this pile of green weeds and they want to take a shortcut. They grab a shovel, dig a trench right next to their garden plants, and bury the leaves raw. It makes sense when you first think about it. You are putting the food right next to the roots. 2 summers ago, a neighbor of mine down the road did exactly this. He read somewhere that comfrey leaves were full of nitrogen, so he chopped a heavy armful of them and buried them thick under his row of beefsteak tomatoes. He came over to my fence line about 3 weeks later, looking defeated. His tomato plants had stopped growing entirely. The bottom leaves were turning a sickly, pale yellow, and the stems were thin. He thought he had a disease in the dirt. I had to tell him what he actually did. Burying raw weeds will stunt your plants worse than if you did nothing at all. When you put raw, fresh green matter into the soil, it immediately begins to rot. But it does not rot on its own. The microscopic life in the soil, the bacteria and the fungi, they have to show up and chew through those thick stems. They have to break down the waxy coating on the leaves. That is heavy labor. To do that work, those microbes need a massive amount of energy. They need nitrogen. So they pull every ounce of free, available nitrogen out of the surrounding dirt to fuel themselves. They eat first. Your tomato plant eats second. They call it nitrogen tie-up. The microbes lock up all the food while they break down the weed. For a month or more, your vegetables will sit there starving in the summer sun. By the time the comfrey finally breaks down and the microbes release that nitrogen back into the earth, the season is half over. You have lost your window for a good harvest. We have to do the rotting outside the garden bed. We have to break the weeds down before they ever touch the soil around our vegetables. The people who built this country with their hands knew things we are only just starting to remember. They knew how this worked. Before the big chemical factories came along, making liquid fertilizer was just how you farmed. After the Second World War, the factories that had been making chemicals for the fighting figured out how to pull synthetic nitrogen right out of the air. The Haber-Bosch process, they call it. They started bagging up that chemical salt and selling it cheap to anybody with a patch of dirt. It changed how people thought about growing food. But before that, if you wanted to grow heavy-feeding crops, big, tight heads of cabbage or tall field corn that needed rich soil, you could not go to the hardware store. You relied on manure teas and fermented plant juices. It was the standard, necessary practice for keeping a farm alive. My grandfather did this every Saturday morning. He had a row of old wooden barrels sitting in the shade behind the milk house. They were always bubbling. He would take the heavy greens from the field borders, chop them rough with a corn knife, and steep them in rainwater. He was letting the microbes do the heavy labor of rotting the plants inside the barrel, so the nitrogen was completely free and ready to drink by the time he poured it on his crops. That is what we are going to do right here with this 5-gallon bucket, but water and weeds alone are not quite enough. If you just leave wet weeds in a bucket, you will eventually get a slimy, putrid mess that takes months to break down. We need this ready in 2 weeks. To get that fermentation happening fast, we need the bacteria to multiply by the millions. We have to feed them while they work. We need an engine. I use this. It is just a jar of unsulfured blackstrap molasses. You can buy it in the baking aisle of the grocery store. It is thick and dark, and it pours like heavy tar. When you open the lid, it smells like burnt earth and raw sugar. That heavy syrup is the engine that drives this entire process. If you put wet weeds in a bucket of water, the natural bacteria will eventually find it, but they will work slow. To break down those tough dandelion taproots and thick comfrey stems in just 2 weeks, we need those microbes to multiply by the millions overnight. To do that, they need raw energy. They need carbohydrates. The molasses is pure, immediate food for the bacteria. The moment it hits the water, the microbes consume the sugars. They multiply. They swarm the plant matter in the bucket, tearing apart the cell walls of the weeds and releasing all that trapped nitrogen directly into the water. But the molasses does more than just feed the bacteria. It feeds the garden too. Blackstrap molasses is the heavy syrup that is left over after they boil down sugarcane. The sugarcane plant is a deep miner itself. If you look at the nutritional data, blackstrap molasses holds about 20% potassium by weight. It is also packed with trace minerals that your soil is probably starving for. It is full of iron, and it is full of magnesium. That magnesium is critical. I don't know the chemistry name for all the parts of it. I know what it does. The magnesium from this jar, and the magnesium pulled up by those deep weed roots, forms the absolute center of the chlorophyll in your garden plants. It sits right in the middle of the cell. Chlorophyll is what makes a tomato leaf dark, rich green. It is what allows the plant to catch the heavy summer sunlight and turn it into actual food. If your pepper plants are turning pale yellow in July, they are running out of magnesium. The blue chemical powder at the hardware store will not give them that. The weeds and the dark syrup will. If you want to keep track of old methods like this, so you do not forget them, there is a guide down in the description that you can print out and keep in your home. Now, I will show you exactly what we need to build this. I have everything laid out right here on the workbench. It is a very short list. First, you need a 5-gallon bucket with a tight-fitting lid. This one is old. It had roof sealant in it 5 years ago, but I scrubbed it out to the bare plastic. It does not need to be pretty. It just needs to hold water. Cost is $0. Second, you need your green matter. 2 heavy armfuls of the deep-rooted weeds we just talked about. Dandelions, comfrey, stinging nettle, or even broadleaf plantain. Whatever is growing thick in your yard. Cost is $0. Third, you need water to fill the bucket. We use rainwater from the barrel out behind the woodshed. I'll show you why it must be rainwater in just a moment, but the cost is zero. And finally, you need the engine. 1 jar of unsulfured blackstrap molasses. A jar this size costs about $3. You only use a couple of tablespoons per batch, so this $3 jar will easily last you 2 full growing seasons. Waste nothing, that is the entire list. For a $3 investment in molasses and an hour of pulling weeds, you can replace $40 worth of synthetic fertilizer. You take a chore you have to do anyway, cleaning up the fence lines, and you turn the waste into the most powerful liquid feed you can give a tomato plant. The pieces are all here. Now, we just have to put them together the right way. I take the corn knife and lay the heavy comfrey and dandelions across a block of scrap pine. You do not have to be gentle with them. You chop them rough, maybe in 2-inch pieces. You want to see the green sap wet on the wood. The more you crush and bruise the stems, the faster the water can get inside and pull the minerals out. Gather up the chopped pieces and drop them into the bucket. Press them down hard with your hands until the plastic bucket is about half full. Now we pour the water. I told you a minute ago that we only use rainwater from the barrel out back. There is a strict reason for that. If you take a garden hose hooked up to the town supply and fill this bucket, you will ruin the whole batch before you even start. City water is treated with chlorine. The town does that on purpose to make the water safe for your house, because chlorine is a chemical sterilizer. Its entire job is to kill microscopic life. But inside this bucket, the microscopic life is the workforce. They are the ones breaking down the weeds. If you pour chlorinated water over these greens, you wipe out the workers. The leaves will just sit in sterile water and turn into a foul, useless sludge. If town water is all you have, you can still do this. Fill an empty bucket and leave it sitting out in the open sun for 2 full days. The chlorine will slowly evaporate off into the air, but rainwater is better. It falls from the sky already carrying the natural bacteria we need. Fill the bucket up with water, but leave about 4 inches of empty space at the top. Now we add the engine. Take 2 heavy tablespoons of the blackstrap molasses. You must read the label on the jar when you are standing in the store. It has to say unsulfured. Sometimes the big sugar refineries use sulfur dioxide to process the cane faster. Just like the town chlorine, sulfur dioxide is a chemical sterilizer. If you put sulfured molasses in this bucket, it will kill the fermentation cold. Take a stout piece of wood. I use a broken piece of a shovel handle and stir the water. The molasses is heavy and thick. It immediately wants to sink and stick to the bottom plastic. You have to scrape the bottom of the bucket and pull that dark syrup up through the water. Keep stirring until the water turns the color of weak coffee. Put the lid on the bucket. Do not snap it down tight. The bacteria are breathing. As they eat the sugars and chew through the dandelion roots, they produce gas. If you hammer the lid down tight, the bucket will swell up and blow the top off. Just set the lid loose on top. That keeps the mosquitoes out, and it keeps the farm dogs from trying to drink it. Carry the bucket and set it somewhere in the shade. The side of the woodshed is a good spot. Direct July sunlight will heat the black plastic too much and sour the brew. Let it sit. Every 2 or 3 days, pull the lid off and give it a hard stir with the stick. You need to pull oxygen down into the water to keep the good bacteria alive. By the 4th day, you will see a thick tan foam bubbling up on the surface. That foam is the proof you want. It means the microbes are multiplying. You will also notice the smell changing. It starts off smelling just like fresh cut grass. By day 7, it changes. It gets heavy. It smells like a wet barnyard and swamp mud. That is the sulfur and the iron releasing from the plant cells. Keep stirring it. At the end of 14 days, the water will be dark as ink. If you fish a piece of comfrey out with the stick, the thick green leaf will be completely gone. Nothing will be left but a thin, stringy skeleton. The brewing is finished, but You cannot just carry this bucket to the garden and pour it on your vegetables. Say the word before you reach your bare hands into that dark water. Put your heavy leather work gloves on. If you use stinging nettles in your batch, the stingers on the stems can still get you when you reach in to pull the leftover stalks out. And you must respect what you have made. This tea is alive. After 2 weeks of sitting in the summer shade, it will harbor strong anaerobic bacteria. It smells terrible. It smells like rot and heavy iron. You must keep that lid resting on top, even when the brewing is finished, or your farm dogs and barn cats will try to drink it. When you are ready to feed your garden, you take an old piece of burlap or a scrap of wire screen and lay it over a second bucket. You pour the thick liquid through. You just want the dark water. Toss the leftover stringy weed skeletons right onto your compost pile. They will keep breaking down there. Now pay attention here. I will be honest with you the way I always try to be. This weed tea is powerful. It is raw, fast nitrogen, and unlocked minerals. If you take that pure, dark water and pour it right onto the roots of a young pepper seedling, you will burn those fragile roots completely. The leaves will turn brown at the edges and crisp up in the sun. You must dilute it. The ratio is 10-to-1. You put 10 parts clean, well water or rainwater into your watering can, and you add just 1 part of your dark weed tea. When you mix it, it will look like weak pale tea. That is exactly what you want. You pour it around the base of the plant, right onto the dirt, maybe once every 2 weeks when the plant is setting fruit. When you pour that diluted tea around the base of a tomato, the soil drinks it right in. You are not leaving a hard crust of chemical salt on top of the dirt. You're sending live bacteria and broken down minerals straight down to the feeder roots. Within 3 or 4 days, you will see those pale yellow leaves turn a deep, rich green. You will see new blossoms set and hold on the vine. There are limits to this, and you need to know them. This tea will feed your plants, but it will not fix soil that is fundamentally poisoned. If you live in the city and you suspect your dirt is contaminated with industrial heavy metals or lead from an old house, this tea will not help you. You need to call your county extension office and have them test your soil. And as we said, if you try to dilute this tea with town water straight from the hose, the chlorine will wipe out the life you just spent 2 weeks growing. At the start of this, I asked you a question. Why do the big fertilizer companies actually need you to throw your dandelions away? It is simple math. As long as you view the weeds as a nuisance, you will bag them up and set them on the curb. You will throw away the pure potassium, the calcium, and the iron that your land grew for free. And when your garden starves because the topsoil is empty, you will have to drive back to the hardware store and pay $25 for a plastic jug of blue salt just to get by. They need you to throw the weeds away so you remain dependent on their powder. Once you learn to pull the deep miners out of the dirt and rot them down in a plastic bucket with a little dark syrup, you step out of their cycle entirely. You take your garden back. Tell me in the comments, what is the most stubborn weed growing in your yard right now? I read every single one. Next time, we are going to look at a $4 method to keep mice out of your feed room before winter sets in. The people who built this country with their hands knew things we are only just starting to remember.